standards set forward for them. So when we're thinking about all these, we have to realize why it is so important in the UN Charter that there's an emphasis on national sovereignty. And for the people around here who don't know what national sovereignty is, that is the right of a country to govern its own people. And that is literally the most important document in the UN. And so many countries base their national policy on this one concept of national sovereignty. And so what we have to do is we have to keep in mind that all these countries have their right to protect their people in the way that they deem fit. So when considering all of that, I think it is really important to consider, where do our values lie as an international community? Are we going to, jump up and go to arms because of an issue like gender violence, which, while important, needs to be dealt with on an individual basis? Or are we going to come and, make people feel threatened and maybe do more harm than good? Thank you.
Thank you, Naziha. I just would like to counter the phrase "protect their people." Now, countries, do have a right given to them by the international community and the United Nations to have sovereignty, to maintain sovereignty, to govern their people in the way that they choose to. But we, as we living in a Western country and idealizing our Western values, have given other regions of the world years and years for them to protect their people. Now, there's no talk of going up to arms about this issue. It isn't really in the sphere of anyone's really foreign policy to do so. But are we going to stand by and let people get murdered? That's the question. And to answer that very question, I will it's exampled by a recent 2010 United Nations resolution that removed sexual orientation from a list of extrajudicial and arbitrary executions. Now, I'll briefly explain this. In 2010, dozens and dozens of countries voted in favor of removing that facet of the UN of that particular UN resolution, which essentially condoned and gave way to exactly that, the arbitrary and extrajudicial executions of people of various sexual identities and orientations. And again, that was in late 2010. That particular UN resolution was essentially reversed with the United States' UN representation. But the question still lingers. In many parts of the world, sexual minorities are not protected, and the vast majority of nations have signed on to this UN Declaration of Human Rights, yet blatantly contravene many of the articles mentioned therein. And also, countries do have a right to intervene. The concept of R2P, responsibility to protect, is a concept that if one country is being, we can cite many examples, but the situation in Bosnia under the Clinton administration, although we didn't go in, NATO forces did, and that doctrine has been present, and it's not to say that we, as an international community, don't have a right to do so as well. And that doesn't just apply to sexual minorities; that applies to countries that do not afford women that right either. Let's see. I just wanted to reiterate that the issue is a transnational, slow, and ongoing Holocaust against people of sexual minorities, and millions of people have been murdered in the past 2-3 centuries because of that, including the Holocaust. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much.
Hi again. In response to what Hassan was saying, first of all, I want to start off by saying Hassan brought attention to the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and how it talks about the duty to protect the rights to security of person and all these other basic human rights. But the Universal Declaration on Human Rights never actually specifically addresses sexual orientation. And the reason it doesn't do this is because sexual orientation is such a controversial issue. And it comes down to the fundamental social norms of the individual cultures and these cultural values. And the reason it does this, or the reason that this is so important, is because cultures will vary based off their, they will act depending on their cultural values. And there's nothing we can really do to change those values. Those values are intrinsic. And after a certain time, we can change them. After a certain time, they'll be more educated and they will gradually change. But to alienate a culture because of their beliefs, well, that kind of doesn't serve the point. That doesn't tell them, yeah, it's wrong to hurt these people. What it does is it makes them feel like they can't communicate with the international community in case they need help or whatever it is, or that these people who believe these values, they don't feel that they can approach the international community to step in for them. And the funny thing about the international community is that they have made provisions for us, or for different countries to step in when the society asks for it. However, to step in before it, as I've said before the society is ready, is detrimental to those social values. The other thing that I personally find interesting is these Western values can be hypocritical in a way. These Western societies have evolved in their own way for hundreds of years. They condemn sexual orientation and other sorts of things, but they are blaming other countries for evolving in their own way. And at a certain point in time, they will agree to these human rights, but they just aren't ready for them yet. And in regards to some of the statistics that Hassan threw out there about, gender violence, how 1 in 3 people internationally suffer from gender violence. Well, in the U.S. it isn't much better, yet we're running around telling other countries how to run themselves, and it's a little bit of a hypocritical stance. So keeping that in mind, I think it's really important that we consider that certain cultures will protect certain values. For example, certain tribal cultures, out of 49 studied, 29 of them supported gay rights and sexual orientation that was apart from the heterosexual norm. So I think it's important to consider that these cultures will vary depending on their background, and we need to adapt to that instead of applying a one-size-fits-all solution. Thank you.